So if you had a particularly stressful pregnancy, let's say, you're a woman who was really under stress when you were 8 months pregnant, how does that impact the baby? And what symptoms are you likely to see in that baby that it wouldn't have had otherwise?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a really tangible answer before I take it back to the something we were talking about before. Imagine the mother's a heroin addict. Mm-hmm. That is affecting the baby, right?
Yeah.
And that's because they share the same blood supply.
Yeah.
So if the mother is stressed and she's got high levels of cortisol, then that cortisol is going through the placenta into the baby's blood supply. And basically being stressed from in utero could switch on genes for not being resilient to stress or being more liable to anxiety or mood disorder. And it's already starting off, inflammation in this tiny baby that hasn't even been born yet. I know that sounds terrible, and I really don't want this to come across like all mums have to be completely zen and never get stressed, because that's just not reality. But, everything that you can do, of course, to manage your stress during pregnancy is helpful. But then completely understanding that if your child then starts to show any symptoms of anxiety or, inability to manage their emotions after an age where they should be kind of able to do that, you can introduce them to meditation. You can sit with them and talk to them about their emotions and how they're feeling. There are lots of really great books and videos that you can use to educate children about that kind of thing. I always say knowledge is power. And unfortunately, difficult things can happen to people in life. But every time something like that's happened to me, I've gone down a rabbit hole of, okay, what can I find that can help me to overcome this and be better?
I was just thinking about, as you were talking about grief and the brain, the relationship between, what happens in the brain when we're experiencing grief and stuff. I was thinking about grief and heartbreak as strong emotions. So many of us, including one of my best friends, is recently grieving a relationship he's lost. And I've got another friend that's lost someone in their life who's passed away. And it's such an all-consuming force that seems to be resistant to advice. I just wondered if through your work you'd learn anything about grief in the brain and heartbreak in the brain. Yeah,
so I think there's so many versions of grief that we've seen, particularly in the last few years, which is loss of sense of self, loss of someone through a relationship breakdown, and loss of someone through actual death. And it's interesting to hear you say, as a caring onlooker, that it's something that's so overwhelming and resistant to advice. I strongly believe that to ever heal from grief, you have to go to the bottom of the hole. And however you do that is not something that anyone else can comment on. I think if you are doing things like throwing yourself back into work or partying too much to avoid it, that's not right. But if somebody has to go somewhere emotionally to deal with grief, they've got to be supported and allowed to do that. And then maybe at times gently nudged in terms of how are you doing? Is it are you feeling any sort of healing or resolution or understanding or acceptance? I do think particularly with grief that if we haven't been through something ourselves, it's really hard to imagine how bad it is, even though you might, care very deeply.
What makes you think that? What makes you think that you have to go to the bottom of the hole?
Because I think we are very avoidant emotionally. I think that's part of the greater issue that I was talking about, which is being lost and disconnected. And I remember when my first marriage broke up and I was changing career, thinking if I hadn't been a psychiatrist and know the things that I know, I can see how you could end up on a psychiatric ward going through, the breakdown of a marriage. So all I'm trying to say, I'm not trying to say you have to feel terrible. What I'm trying to say is you have to process all the emotions and you kind of have to surrender to it a bit, because if you try to gloss over that, it will come back and bite you later. And I've seen many stories of that happening where people, did really great things like write a book about it or, shower all of their care and love and attention onto other people, and then eventually found that they hadn't actually dealt with their own emotions. So when I say go to the bottom of it, I don't necessarily mean feel really terrible. I mean process all of the emotions fully, because then you can actually heal and at some stage move forward. It doesn't mean you forget, the person or what happened, but if you try to gloss over it, I think it's dangerous, because it's such a deep emotion. It's such a facing of your own mortality.